Welcome to the Doc Washburn Show. If you like what we do, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Rumble channel and hit that notification bell. That way, more people will find out about our content and you'll be notified every time we do a new video. Our guest today is John O'Connor, author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and began today's partisan advocacy journalism, and host of the Mysteries of Watergate podcast. He's a co-author of the book, Mark Felt, The Man Who Brought Down the White House. Mr. O'Connor served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California, representing the USA in both criminal and civil cases. And he's also author of the fascinating new book, The Mysteries of Watergate, What Really Happened. His books and recent articles on current events are available at his website, postgatebook.com. Mr. O'Connor, welcome to the Doc Washburn Show. How are you today?
Good to be with you, Doc.
Thank you very much. Now, before we get to your books, I just want to ask you a question about impeachment as it relates to the current resident of the Oval Office. It's commonly understood that President Nixon left office in 1974 because there was a real possibility that he would have been impeached if he didn't step down. Almost 50 years later, in your view, what does the current situation look like for Joseph Robinette Biden?
Well, there are some distinctions. First of all, what Nixon did pales in comparison to all the things that Biden's done. However, the big distinction, well, there are two big distinctions. Number one, Nixon had a very, very biased press against him, which hid all of the exculpatory facts. Whereas Biden has just the opposite. The press is hiding all the inculpatory facts. But the second distinction, Doc, is timing. This thing got going on Nixon right at the beginning of his second term. And so by the summer of 1974, he would have been out. Now, if you've started the impeachment proceedings on Biden now, which, by the way, would not be successful in terms of removal, it would be a nugatory event because nothing would happen, basically, timing-wise, until the end of his term, if that. So it's good to have an impeachment inquiry because an impeachment inquiry gives Congress an enhanced ability to get information by subpoena, because you now no longer have to have a solely legislative purpose. You can have an impeachment purpose, which gives you a broader range of discovery, and therefore the American people can get more when it's an impeachment inquiry. And so that's good. This is all about democracy and the public's right to know. The media has not done a good job, the major media, of letting us know, so we need the megaphone of Congress to get it out there. So I think it's a salutary effort. I think it's a good effort to have the impeachment inquiry, but that's all it's going to be, and that's all it should be.
Yeah, you bring up, and by the way, for the record, nugatory, for those of us who don't know, and I didn't, is defined as of no value or importance. I guess that's a kind of a legal term.
It's a 25-cent term, or maybe $1.50 in today's environment with inflation.
Yes,
but it was just a quick way of saying that by saying nugatory.
Yeah, it's the Biden inflation. Probably went from 25 cents to $1.50 pretty quickly. So there's something that you said, which a lot of times people just gloss over, and some people actually seem to be ignorant of when you talk about impeachment. You're saying it would not be effective in removing Biden from office. And it flabbergasts me that people say, oh, no, you can't impeach Biden because look who's next. As a matter of fact, we do a national podcast here, but I happen to be in Little Rock, Arkansas. And a few months back, Senator Tom Cotton said, well, you don't want to impeach Biden because Kamala Harris is next. And I'm like, Tom Cotton, impeachment means the House votes against him, and then you have a trial in the Senate. And that to remove a president from office, you have to have 2/3 of the senators vote to convict. That's 67 senators. And you know that you're not going to be able to get enough Democrats to vote to convict. So why are you acting like there's a real possibility that a president could be removed from office? They impeached Trump a couple of times. Once before he left office, they impeached Bill Clinton, and neither one of them, those processes led to removal from office. It's one thing for just the regular Joe who's not really paying attention to go, I don't know, man. Impeachment? Yeah, look at the VP. Look who's next in line. It's another thing for people actually in Washington to pretend that it could happen. Does it frustrate you sometimes when people seem to not understand that impeachment is a two-step process? First, the House does this, then the Senate has to do that, especially since we're talking about recent events.
Well, yes, Doc, and it is a two-step process, but that has pros and cons to it. Yes, as you correctly point out, impeachment doesn't mean removal, so we don't have to worry about Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, because impeachment doesn't mean removal, and the Democrats will be so solid against it, it will then be made, especially with our media, it will be made to look like a purely political stunt, where it is not. But it would be made to look that way, and it would probably backfire politically. I just happen to think it wouldn't be wise. Do I think it's appropriate? Yes. I think he's justifiably impeached. But on the other hand, I don't think we ought to do it. It's interesting, Doc, going back to Watergate, where the impeachment process was probably sure to get enough votes to remove. One of the big obstacles was the fact that the vice president was Spiro Agnew, who was corrupt and a terrible politician to boot. And so my father's own partner, William Ruckelshaus at the time, was a deputy attorney general, ended up getting fired in the Saturday Night Massacre. But he had told my father, look, we've got to get rid of Agnew first before anything can happen, because what will happen is if they get rid of Nixon, you've now got a crook that's going to take over the office, who is actually getting cash payments in paper bags in his vice presidential office. So if the impeachment loomed to be a success, Kamala Harris would be clearly a detriment to the process. I couldn't think of a worse person to inhabit the office, even worse than Biden, if that's possible. So, but anyway, I think it's a good discussion to have, Doc. It's a very, very it's a very helpful one for our democracy to start talking about what Biden has done. Now, especially here when we are getting possibly to the brink of a large-scale war, and we cannot help but see that some of Biden's conflicts now may be coming home to roost, even though they're conflicts that really arise out of his, corruption, both China and in Ukraine. But remember, China's in the mix here. They're giving support to these folks, and so I think that we all should be looking at this and seeing what actions has Biden taken that have fueled the unrest. I don't think they're corrupt actions. I think they're silly actions in this case. Sure, the corrupt actions on behalf of China have kept him from disciplining China.
Yeah.
But let's look at his foolish attempts to restart the Iran nuclear deal, plus his foolish climate agenda. That's the one that's tough. With his foolish climate agenda, he has all but stopped the United States from increasing its production so that we are truly independent and are a net exporter. If we're a net exporter of fuel, the prices go down because we can control that market because we've got a glut. And gluts mean that prices go down. So what we've done is we have given Iran, and then we've also eased sanctions on Iran because of this foolish nuclear deal they're chasing. We have eased sanctions on Iran so that they and plus the inflationary price rises have given them $90 billion extra, $90 billion extra annually. This $6 billion in cash we've released we will release because of the hostages is a drop in the bucket compared to that 90 billion. And that has kept, by all accounts, including the New York Times, this increased oil price rise has motivated Iran not to do any kind of a deal with this at all. Any kind of a deal, not only as to nukes, but as to other missiles and so forth, the embargo on missile development and so forth. So they're in no mood and have no motivation to cut a deal with this. They have no economic pressure. We've eased sanctions on them. We've caused the price of oil to rise and for them to be wealthy and are funding all these things. They've got mad money. So that is a direct result of a foolish climate agenda, which thinks that somehow the world will be better if America quit producing fossil fuel. We still need to use it. And so one of the things that Biden has tried to do is he's tried to get increased supply from Iran. Not only has he caused the price to rise, but now he's begging Iran for fuel, eased the sanctions on Iran so that its production now is risen because of our talks with Iran from 2.4 billion barrels a day to 3.5. And the result of that is a few $100 million a day. I think it's 90 million a day, something like that. But the point is that we have done everything we can to make Iran stronger in the guise of a climate agenda. And Obama's previous desire, somehow foolishly, to cut a diplomatic deal with Iran, which was a non-starter. The talks originally started out to mean that we would cause Iran to dismantle any nuclear program. By the end of the talks, they wore us down. And by the end of the talks, we said, okay, you can have industrial grade nuclear production within so many years, within 10 years of 2015, which is right around the corner. So the deal was silly. The deal ended up being a license for them to build a nuclear plant. They're doing it now. They've got enriched uranium. It's up over 60% now. They're just about ready to have enough fissile material to bomb the hell out of everybody. And now we have to look back also at Obama and Biden's policies to sort of stifle Israel and to help Iran. And probably it would have been a good idea looking back on it to allow Israel to strike the budding nuclear facilities of Iran.
Absolutely. No question about it. Well, I guess in Kamala Harris's defense, at least she tends to have a bright and always sunshiny demeanor. I mean, she's always laughing whenever you see her in public because you get the impression her IQ is so low and she realizes she's so far over her head that as a defense mechanism, all she can do is laugh at no matter what is going on around her. So my feeble attempt at humor. Right. Also, for the record, I am old enough to remember the Saturday Night Massacre. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression I got was that President Nixon wanted his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire the special counsel, Archibald Cox. And Richardson's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And Nixon's like, okay, you're fired. Next guy, Assistant Attorney General Ruckelshaus, you fire Archibald Cox. And Ruckelshaus is like, nah, I can't. And so finally you get to Robert Bork, the Solicitor General. And he's like, okay, you want to fire Archibald Cox? Go ahead. Is that pretty much what happened?
Yes. And even Bork resigned right after he fired him. He thought he had the duty to follow the president's order. And so he fired him. Whereas Richardson Ruckelshaus has just said, I'm not going to do it, mainly because they had promised when they appointed Archibald Cox that they wouldn't do it. So they were in a little different position from Bork. Yeah. They had a sense of honor as to what they did and to what they promised Congress. Bork hadn't been in that position. And so he could justifiably say, okay, I'll fire him, but I quit as soon as I fire him. So that's what happened. And it's mainly because they were pressing, Archibald Cox was pressing to get the tapes from Nixon. And who knows what would have happened had Nixon not dug his line in the sand, that he may have been able to cut a deal that was a little better for him. But in any case, I just can't understand. Well, I can't understand. In my book, Postgate, I talk about the sources I have that stated that Richard Nixon did not want to destroy the tapes because he had been advised by two separate tax firms that he could deduct the tapes after his office, after leaving office. He could deduct the tapes as charitable contributions and wipe off income for various unique purposes and get the market value of them. So I think he originally didn't want to destroy the tapes. And there we have it. It's really sort of silly because I don't think he ever would have been impeached without those tapes.
I seem to recall, and again, I was in high school at the time, but it's hard to imagine these days when you don't have a C-SPAN and you don't have a Fox News or a Newsmax or an MSNBC, CNN, any of that stuff. Hard to imagine that in those days, most towns had 3 TV stations. You got ABC, CBS, and NBC. Bigger cities like New York and LA had a few more, but the networks were preempting regular programming, preempting the soap operas every day for a long time with these Watergate hearings. And I think it was a guy named Alexander Butterfield who was the first guy who said, by the way, there are tapes. And that just set off a firestorm. And they had to find out. And it was quite an admission. So let me go back to your thoughts on Biden and impeachment, the pros and the cons. One of the pros that I hadn't considered, and a lot of people don't realize, is that it allows you to subpoena a lot of stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't have a legal justification for. In other words, you were saying, well, ordinarily Congress can subpoena stuff if they can come up with some kind of justification. Well, we might need this for legislation. We're thinking about drafting a bill for this, that, or the other thing, and so we're going to subpoena this. But with the impeachment, it's like, no, we're subpoenaing to try to get some evidence here because we think, this guy has possibly committed the crimes that the Constitution talks about you impeach somebody for. Now, as we record this interview, it's been less than 24 hours since new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, went on Hannity over at Fox and regarding the impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden said, it's a quote now, if in fact all the evidence leads to where we believe it will, that's very likely impeachable offenses that's listed as a cause for impeachment in the Constitution, bribery. Now, a lot of us out here in flyover country just look at what the Constitution says about what you impeach somebody for. And we're sitting here not thinking about what you had just said about you got to look at how it's going to look politically as you're headed up to, an election. We're just sitting here wondering what's taking so long. You got millions of dollars going through 20 different shell corporations and numerous members of the Biden extended family. You have the recent allegation of a direct payment of $200,000 to Joe himself. And so a lot of us are going, well, doggone it, you impeach him because it looks like you can make a slam dunk case, even though you're not going to get 67 votes in the Senate, that he's done these things. But if I understand correctly, you're like, yeah, but you got to consider the political ramifications.
Well, I'll give you another thought, Doc. The other problem with the proof here is that really his corruption relates mainly to his time as a vice president and years following, in which it looks like he's getting paid for actions that he started as a vice president and maybe had some influence thereafter with the with the bureaucracy. But that's one of the stumbling blocks. The other stumbling block you have is some of the evidence is something that the government may not want to release. For example, the names of confidential informants. Are you going to get an informant to testify? Well, you're not going to probably get that. You'll probably, and there's nothing wrong, I think, with having a report to put into evidence, but nonetheless, that's weaker evidence than somebody coming in, as in Watergate, raising their right hand and saying, yes, I know I heard so-and-so admit that he paid Biden $5 million and his son $5 million to fire the prosecutor. So I think there are a host of issues that, and then what's going to happen is, the other problem is that evidence, and I think it's good for the speaker to speak that way, because you have to have a sincere purpose to consider impeachment. So I think it's good that he mouths those words. But do I think at the end of the day that it's practical? No. They'll end up with that evidence by June or July, when the conventions are coming up. It just doesn't look good. And it looks like it's also a quixotic gesture, because after all, there's an election coming up. And we know there's not going to be enough votes anyway. And Chuck Schumer will be all over the airwaves talking about how stupid it is. And I think it would hurt. It would hurt, actually, the more conservative part of the electorate. I think in the purple parts of the country, in these key election swing states, so for example, the collar counties around Philadelphia, I think the suburban women will react strongly against this. I think the people you really need, you're going to win the true believers. There's no doubt about that, but you don't need the true believers. You've got to persuade the purple sections not to support this guy in the White House. And I don't think it's going to help a lot, especially given the fact, now I think it's good to publicize the fact that Biden's a crook, because his wrongdoing, anything Trump's done pales in comparison to what Biden's done. I mean, Trump is technically, maybe he lied and obstructed in Mar-a-Lago. Everything else is kind of BS as far as I'm concerned. I think he did have an issue with lying and obstruction in Mar-a-Lago. But the point is, nobody got hurt. Nobody has a bloody knee. It's really kind of silly. It's just really propaganda wars here. And they could have gotten those documents by a civil subpoena. So even that charge, which is a valid legal charge, is sort of petty ante stuff. So I think it serves as a good contrast to say, look, Biden's a crook, and it's hurt our national interest because his range of options are limited because of that, because he's been bought and sold. Whereas Trump, his problem is he's not bought and sold to anybody. He shoots off his mouth to the chagrin of his lawyers and advisors who would like him to keep quiet. But that's the way he is, and it gets him in trouble. And he does things on his own that gets him in trouble. But people see that. They see that this is not a guy that's selling out his office like Biden did. This is a guy that's maybe a bit headstrong, a bit of a bumptious American is what he is. He's a classic American type. Don't tread on me. I as a lawyer, I blanch at some of the stuff he does, as his lawyers do, I'm sure. But it will serve as a useful contrast, is what I'm saying. But I don't think we should do anything about it past an impeachment inquiry.
Our interview with John O'Connor, author of The Mysteries of Watergate, What Really Happened, will continue in just a moment. If you've tried to buy a car recently, you realize you may have a hard time finding what you're looking for. People I know have actually bought vehicles from hundreds of miles away from where they live. That's where Red River Auto comes in. Red River Auto is a big old car dealership in the middle of the USA that believes in freedom, including your freedom to buy a car, truck, van, or SUV the way you want to. You can buy online and they'll drive it to you no matter where you are. Red River Auto wants to make your car buying experience as easy and transparent as possible. Red River Auto Group has perfected the online buying process. Just go to redriverauto.com and pick from hundreds of new and used vehicles. You can purchase a vehicle online. If you have any questions, one of Red River's trained experts will help you through the whole process. Red River Auto makes car buying online easy. Your whole car buying process is completely transparent. If you want to buy a car, truck, van, or SUV, order online from the nationwide car dealer that believes in freedom. The dealer that will deliver your vehicle to your front door, no matter where you live in the continental U.S., RedRiverAuto.com. You'll be glad you did. I want to tell you about the best kept secret in American healthcare. Are you having problems with sinuses and allergies? Are you experiencing dizziness, vertigo, problems with your blood sugar, fibromyalgia, eczema, psoriasis, migraines? The Arkansas Upper Cervical Center might be able to help you. Let me tell you how. Your skull weighs anywhere from 8 to 15 pounds. It rests on the top bone of your spinal column, the atlas or C1, which only weighs 2 ounces. So it's really easy for your atlas to get out of alignment. If it does, your whole spinal column can get kinked up like a chain. When that happens, your central nervous system isn't able to communicate with the rest of your body as it's designed to do. I had severe hay fever for 5 or 6 weeks every spring all my life and migraines year round. When I got my atlas adjusted, the hay fever went away and the migraines went away for good. Whatever malady you're suffering from, do yourself a favor. Call my friends at the Arkansas Upper Cervical Center, 501-279-2009 for a free consultation. They've helped so many people I know. Please call them to see if they can help you. That number for your free consultation is 501-279-2009. If you're outside Central Arkansas, go to their website, turnmypoweron.com. Click on the tab that says Find a Doctor Near You, and I sure hope you can. Mike Lindell says because of your amazing support for MyPillow 2.0, he's expanded MyPillow's USA manufacturing and jobs. So he's clearing out his percale bed sheets by giving them to you at closeout prices. King size percale bed sheets, only $39 a set. Queen size, only $35 a set. Full size, $29, and twin size, just $25. Use promo code DWS to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime offer. Right now, Mike's biggest My Slippers closeout sale ever is on. Get Mike's all-season My Slippers and sandals at clearance prices. Mike's all-season moccasin slippers are just $25. Mike's My Slipper sandals are just $19.50. They're both made with Mike's patented impact gel that absorbs and relieves pressure so you can comfortably wear them all day long. Just use promo code DWS for huge discounts. Remember, DWS stands for Doc Washburn Show. MyPillow.com. Quantities are extremely limited at these amazing prices, so please order now. Just use promo code DWS. And now here's more of our interview with John O'Connor. So let me ask you this. With Biden, and the media is doing their best to try to cover this up, but they can only cover up so much. As Britt Hume on Fox said a couple of years ago, the dementia is pretty obvious. And it's not age related. I mean, I think we've probably all known people in their 90s who are just sharp as a tack. But with Biden, it keeps getting worse. And there have been public conversations, political types, like, are they going to replace him? Are they going to allow him to be renominated? And I'm wondering if the impeachment, if it were to go forward, might not be a gift to the Democrats who would use that opportunity to say, no, we're not kicking him to the curb because he's being impeached, but he's having a lot of health difficulties. So we're going to bring in Michelle Obama or Gavin Newsom or somebody. The impeachment, that's political, those terrible Republicans. But yeah, he is having some health issues, and that would be kind of like greasing the skids, because right now they may be trying to figure out, we know he's not going to make it through another 4 years. And so do we pull the plug sometime between now and the conventions next summer? I'm terrible with predictions. What do you think?
Well, I do think there are a lot of Democrats right now looking for an excuse to push him off the stage. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. I heard a lot of rumors this summer from, pretty influential Democrats that's what they were trying to do, looking for their opportunity. But as long as Biden insists on going forward, no one can do anything about it. And I think his inner circle is enjoying life too much. I do think his dementia is age related. Let me just say that. There's a sliding scale. you start getting age-related, which is just what you call senile dementia, which is vascular dementia. That happens around the late 70s, in the mid-70s, and a certain percentage of the population will get it until you live to be 115, when 100% of people get it. But he's got it worse than most people do his age. But what I'm saying is, it's senile dementia, and it's just getting worse. Every day that he exists, he's getting a little bit worse in terms of his vascular occlusion and the results of it. So it would be a good thing for the Democrats to get him off stage, and it would be a good thing for Trump and any Republican candidate to have him on stage, because I think nobody wants Biden to be in office anymore. And now that we're seeing this war in the Middle East, I think we realized how incapable he is, and how we don't want a guy like this and the facts, if they were to publish the facts, I think he can work about 3 hours a day if he's given his Adderall and vitamin B. So I think that's a problem when you're supposed to have a wartime president. You see, the other thing about this war is, I think he thinks, and his inner circle thinks, that this is going to buck him up in terms of his public persona as a wartime president, and his steely-eyed gaze into the cameras, that he's going to stand by Israel. Whereas when he's off camera, he's soiling his pants and worrying about whether Israel's going to actually invade. So I don't really think he stands with Israel. He stands maybe 1 foot with Israel and 1 foot with the Palestinians. And he doesn't know whether to spit or go blind here. But I think the public will see that and want to get rid of him. So politically, this whole thing is great for the Republicans. So I think we should be careful what we wish for. That's why I'm in favor of the impeachment inquiry, but not really doing anything to get rid of him. And there's just no way that that the people would vote for him. His poll numbers are terrible. The moment Gavin Newsom steps in, and he's the only viable Democratic candidate, the moment he steps in is the moment the Democrats win this election. Gavin Newsom lives near me. He's a fine fellow personally. I happen to not be in his political camp, but I think
thank goodness. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, he when he lives in Marin, he lives just over the hill from me. But and I know his in-laws, but and they're fine people. But I think he's a very attractive guy. He's got a nice speaking style and so forth. And I think in today's advertising world, that's going to be enough to get him elected. They're going to see a nice youthful guy with a good voice and so forth and so on, saying all the right things. And that's probably going to get him elected. So he's champing at the bit, and we'll see. We'll see. Now, the longer Biden hangs in there, the harder it is for Newsom to get in there. We've already passed the deadline for registering, I think, in New Hampshire, and there's other states that are coming up where the deadline to register as a candidate is fast approaching.
Right. So, but if for whatever health reason Biden were to drop out at the last minute, somebody's going to be ready. There are all kinds of war gaming ideas and, well, what if this and what if that? It's not like nobody's thinking about these things. Now, let's get to your book, The Mysteries of Watergate, What Really Happened. As I mentioned before, I was in high school. Watergate hearings were going on. Network TV was running them every day. My friends and I would literally bring bag lunches from home and watch the hearings in homeroom during our lunch hour. Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who broke the Watergate story, who you write about at length, of course, wrote a best-selling book called All the President's Men, got Pulitzers. Hollywood turned it into a very successful movie starring Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. Subsequent generations may not be aware, younger people, of what a big deal the Watergate scandal was 50 years ago. But Woodward met with a shadowy figure, a government source he referred to as Deep Throat, who would make suggestions about what he should investigate to further his reporting along. For decades, nobody could figure out the identity of Deep Throat, but you did early on. And eventually you were able to persuade former FBI Deputy Director Mark Felt to go public and tell his side of the story. How did you do that?
Well, first of all, I figured it out in 1974 to 76 when I was a young prosecutor. And I'm an evidence man, and I felt as I went through the book time and time again, I could collect the evidence and by circumstantial evidence show it was Mark Felt. I didn't think anybody would care what a young fellow had to say about this. Got married, had kids, educated them. And lo and behold, when I'm with my daughter's Stanford classmates here for a little celebration, it turns out that one of her friends who I'd known for a couple of years was Mark Felt's grandson. And I said to him, Nick, do you know that your grandfather's Deep Throat? And he was sort of stunned by that. He said, well, he's always denied it. Anyway, then I went up and met him. The family agreed that I would represent him. It took a few weeks for me to convince Mark to admit it. He wouldn't admit it when I first approached him, although he seemed captivated by the ideas that I was putting forth and the heroism that I was imparting to Deep Throat. And it ended up being a very nice run of years for us to go through this. It was a very happy event for him and his family, and it helped him psychologically to unburden himself and realize that he did the right thing. What I would say, though, Doc, about Deep Throat is everyone thinks he's this anti-Nixon guy. He was not. He was a straight man. The big stuff he told the Post about the hypothesized White House involvement in Watergate was published a bit too fulsomely and perhaps exaggerated what the FBI was finding. Whereas if you recall, there's a big part of the book and the movie where he goes into the garage one time quivering, saying everybody's life's in danger. It's the covert, it's the intelligence community that's worried about exposure. Well, that's the CIA. Now, Woodward put that in the book and movie because it sells movies and sells books, but he didn't report it at the time, did he? No. There was no story, whereas there was a big blow-up story after their first garage meeting. Oh, the White House is engaging in a campaign of spying and surveillance, spying and sabotage. When it was clear that the CIA was involved in threatening lives, not a word was published by the Post. And that's just one dramatic example of how the Post sort of rigged the game on Watergate. So Deep Throat also, therefore, shows how anonymous sources, the problem with them, because if you say something, if you print something that's wrong or too harsh, as happened originally, the source can't correct it because he's anonymous. He can't say, oh, wait a second, I didn't say that to Woodward. I met in the garage with him last night, and I just said we thought that this might be the case, not that we have established that it's the White House led this. He can't go public and say, hey, why haven't you published my story about the CIA? You haven't published it. So he has to keep silent. So that's one lesson from Watergate that people don't seem to take, and certainly the people who don't take that lesson are reporters. They are all looking for their own deep throat that will get them fame and fortune, and they're looking for stories that they slant toward political effect, as happened in Watergate. And that's one of the problems. You get Pulitzer Prizes and movies and books if you get somebody's scalp, preferably a conservative scalp if you're depending on the team you're on, but preferably a conservative scalp. And that's what our media has devolved into since Watergate. I was always a big fan of the Watergate reporting until I was able to examine it. I now have I've now printed out all 3,000 Post articles and then have examined them against the events as occurred at the time to which they were privy, and said, look, you guys lied. You guys hid evidence, and you lied about the evidence you had.
So I was going to ask you, why you think Bob Woodward refused to cooperate with you in helping Mark Felt get his story out, early in the 2000s. But I think you've kind of answered that already. But
well, no, I haven't. The reason Woodward didn't come out, because Woodward could have controlled the story. Now I'm here a Lone Ranger and I can say anything I want. If I would have cut a deal with Woodward, I would have been prevented from doing that because I didn't understand at the time how much they'd lied. But Woodward wouldn't do it, I think, because he didn't want to share the money. We thought, gee, Bob, let's do a joint project and we'll jointly share the proceeds. I'll help you. Mark will help you. We've got a lot to offer and we'll have a lot of fun. You two can do a great last hurrah and do a victory lap together. Won't that be great? Well, he would never cooperate with us and would never admit that Mark was Deep Throat. So when I went to try to publish the story by myself, people would ask me, well, what does Woodward say? And I said, well, Woodward won't confirm or deny. He won't cooperate. Well, that spooks them because he's supposed to be a friend of Deep Throat. So you would think he would confirm if Mark was Deep Throat. So why would Woodward withhold confirmation? People want to know. Well, that kept the story from being published for about 3 years. I mean, it took me a long time to get a publisher on this story. So what we have is a case where a reporter not only owns the story back in Watergate, but he thinks he can control it 50 years later, 35 years later. And so now we have a situation in which the press is the one that is controlling the story. The press is the one that tells us what we get and what we don't get. And it really was amplified when I tried to talk about his source. So it does not tell a good tale as to the press. I happen to like Bob Woodward personally. I don't have anything against him personally. I want him to make as much money as he can. That's great. But I just think it's too bad as a general criticism of the press in general. And I don't think he acted any different than a lot of other people in the press would act. This is my story. I'm making money out of it. I'm going to squeeze that lemon a little more when Mark dies. And there we are.
Yeah, Woodward is famous for coming out with books after people die. And the whole thing with Bill Casey,
Right.
him getting into the hospital room when Bill Casey is in critical condition and people going, wait a minute, did that really, so that's, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that kind of jogged my memory. But, motion pictures, films that are well done can be really powerful for propaganda purposes. And as a young man, watching All the President's Men and Dustin Hoffman, one of the great actors of our time, of any time, and he and Redford are trying to get this young secretary in her living room late at night to talk. And Hoffman becomes Carl Bernstein. You're forgetting the fact this is Dustin Hoffman, and you're feeling the emotion of the moment, and you're thinking there is so much at stake here. And it really makes you wonder, you got the CIA angle in the book and the movie, but why wouldn't they have it in their original reporting in the Washington Post to give people the idea that, whoa, this is a huge deal. I mean, it's already a huge deal without the CIA, but then that takes it to the next level. Do you have any idea why they would wait, put it in the book and the movie, but not in the newspaper reporting?
Well, because even in the book and the newspaper, it isn't precisely put in your face that it's the CIA. You don't really know how it connects. They talk about the CIA wanting to assassinate people, but they don't put the pieces together that they had, even in the book and the movie. So they do it just right. They add mystery and allure to the story without really telling the whole story and how this thing was really a CIA job from the get-go. They also continue to hide the fact that it was about naughty boys talking to naughty girls. That's what they were listening to. And because the CIA had an interest in that, they like to extort people. Any operation of the CIA in the United States is illegal under their charter, unless, of course, it's not stated in the charter, but unless there's an implied exception, unless the President of the United States, the Commander in Chief of the Armed Forces under the Constitution, says it's okay. So by getting undercover, getting undercover status with the White House, unbeknownst to them, the CIA could justifiably claim it had authority to do all this. So that's the whole reason that Hunt infiltrated the White House and McCord infiltrated the campaign. But you're right. You're right. They really still have never told the real truth. Even recently, on the 50-year anniversary of the break-in, John Dean had a special on CNN, and Woodward was quoted as saying, well, this whole thing came because Richard Nixon just had an inordinate desire to win the election, regardless of how silly it was, the antics he did. This had nothing to do with winning the election, had nothing to do with Richard Nixon. And Woodward knows that. But he's still peddling a false story by doing that, because right now he can't say anything else. I mean, if he says, by the way, this wasn't really about Richard Nixon winning an election, it was about something else. Now it looks like all of his reporting was false. And it was, in its essence, in its overall essence. The details he put out were, of course, for the most part, quite correct. But they masked an underlying reality that is that tells an entirely different story.
Note to self: guest has put forth a proposition that at times intel agencies like to blackmail people. Be sure to research. Sorry.
Yes. You notice that the CIA continues to get funding. When Frank Church had his infamous Church Committee hearings getting into the investigating the intelligence agencies after Watergate, the FBI had to testify publicly, along with my client, Mark Felt. But the CIA, everything happened in closed session because of national security, and no one was ever hung up by their thumbs. And there was a white paper issued after that, and I think that's confidential as well. But you can bet that the CIA had tapes and pictures and all sorts of information about key members of Congress. And as a matter of fact, it appears that they were wiretapping several members of the Senate during Watergate around that time. And it came out, the Post actually sort of incidentally revealed that in early 1973. Nobody paid attention to what it meant. The way the Post reported it looked like the White House was doing this, surveilling people like William Fulbright and so forth. I think there were 3 senators. All of the people that they were surveilling, the senators the CIA were surveilling, had nothing to do with Watergate, of course, but it did have to do with people who oversaw the CIA and recommended its funding. Isn't that funny the way that works? That now those people don't insist on bringing justice to bear on the CIA. Nobody loses their pension. Nobody gets criminally prosecuted, and no one's the wiser.
The conclusion of our interview with John O'Connor, author of The Mysteries of Watergate, What Really Happened, is coming right up. You know, the great Ronald Reagan once said, inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman. Have you thought about the benefits of investing in precious metals? Here are 5 profound benefits. Number 1, investing in precious metals is a hedge against inflation. Number 2, it's a great way to diversify your portfolio. Number 3, asset liquidity. Number 4, precious metals tend to be a store of value. They don't tend to depreciate over the long haul. And last but not least, number 5, precious metals can be a hedge against geopolitical uncertainty and the struggling U.S. dollar. Andrew Sorcini with Beverly Hills Precious Metals has been involved in gold and silver for over 40 years. Beverly Hills Precious Metals brings precious metals to the homes of everyday American citizens. Mike Flynn told us about them, and they are our gold buyer of choice. To find out more, just Google Beverly Hills Precious Metals. Make sure you ask about the General Mike Flynn silver coin and tell them Doc Washburn sent you. Beverly Hills Precious Metals helps folks protect their finances, wealth, and investments. If you want to drop your big liberal cell phone carrier, Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless carrier, is a perfect solution. Patriot Mobile has exceptional nationwide coverage and uses the same towers the main carriers use. Patriot Mobile guarantees your coverage. Patriot Mobile has plans to fit any budget, along with great discounts for our veteran and first responder heroes, as well as multi-line users. And switching to Patriot Mobile usually only takes 15 to 20 minutes. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you shift your support from the leftist progressive agendas of Big Mobile to the Christian conservative causes of Patriot Mobile. Patriot Mobile donates a portion of every dollar earned to organizations that fight for causes you care about. A portion of every dollar they earn is given back to the causes that support organizations that fight for First Amendment religious freedom, freedom of speech, Second Amendment right to bear arms, sanctity of life, and the needs of our veterans and first responders. Now more than ever, it's important to band together and support companies that share our conservative values. Switching is easy. Just do what I did. Go to patriotmobile.com or call their U.S.-based customer service team at 972-PATRIOT. Make sure you use promo code DOC, that's DOC, for free activation. Yeah, let me ask you something. Why continue shopping big box stores if you can get the items you need from a family-owned company? Now you can get around this crazy inflation by shopping factory direct at a family-owned, made-in-America manufacturer. Americans are walking away from the big box conglomerates and deciding to buy only USA. Join with fellow patriots to cut off the cash flow of the big woke corporations that are trying to destroy our country. These products include fresh American-raised beef, raised in the Montana mountains near Yellowstone. This beef is known as Never Ever. Never has the animal ever been exposed to antibiotics, hormones, or vaccines. This prime or high choice beef is shipped directly to your door. Pricing and availability is exclusive only to our members and isn't shipped anywhere else in the world. Let's start voting with our dollars to make sure our purchases are supporting companies that promote freedom. Email us at buyonlyusa@proton.me, and I'll have one of my guys contact you. Buyonlyusa@proton.me. And now the conclusion of our interview with John O'Connor. So you mentioned naughty boys talking to naughty girls.
Right.
And there was a Watergate figure named G. Gordon Liddy, who went on to have a colorful career as a radio talk show host, irreverently known to some as the G-Man. Now, for many years, he claimed that the Watergate burglary was in large part a cover-up launched by John Dean, because Liddy's allegation now, Dean's then girlfriend, later wife, was in some sort of call girl ring, and the burglars were sent to DNC Chairman Larry O'Brien's office in the Watergate complex to steal the information. Always seemed to be kind of far-fetched to me, but for the record, your thoughts, sir.
Well, he's close. I think he goes a little bit too far, saying that Maureen Dean was a target here. But the second burglary, remember, there'd been a 2-week electronic monitoring before this. Now the second burglary was mainly to get documents, not to do wiretapping, but to get documents in the desk of the secretary who would refer the out-of-town Democrats to the call girl ring down the street. They would have phone conversations, but there was supposed to be a treasure trove of documents there relating to the call girl ring. I think it is the better, and I covered in my book, I think the better construction of the evidence is that Dean wanted to know what the Democrats might have on him. And because he did know the madam. Okay, the madam was Maureen's friend from years past. So he knew the madam. And so I think he was wondering whether or not they had anything in there about him. That's my construction because of, and I get into it in the book. It's a little bit too much for me to relate everything now, but it had to do with a newspaper article that came out that suggested that a lawyer at the White House was involved in a call girl ring. And that's when he went in a second time. And that's what caused everything. The CIA was against that second incursion. Now, Liddy couldn't figure it out at the time why they would go into Watergate a second time. He was against it the first time because he said this has nothing to do with the campaign. He was a dupe in this whole thing. He thought it was a bad campaign operation. He didn't know what the CIA, he didn't realize he was being duped by the CIA. Now, years later, after evidence comes out, now he realizes what the whole thing was about, and he gets very close to the truth. But I think he goes a step too far in saying that Maureen was involved. I don't have any evidence of that.
Yeah. No, understood. So I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, that Bob Woodward is still saying that Nixon hatched this plot. He launched this thing because it was all about getting reelected. You know, the guy won 49 states to 1. It was an historic landslide. And I don't think that really surprised anyone, including his opponent, Senator George McGovern. And does Woodward just think with the passage of time, enough people won't realize how ludicrous this thought is, that it really was all about the committee to reelect the president?
Well, at the time, people asked the same question. They said, why would he do this? He was so far ahead.
Yeah.
And so forth. And so Woodward just says, well, he was obsessive. He was obsessive. It was irrational for him to do this. Well, as Nixon has the counter to that, Nixon was said to his folks, it's one thing for anybody to think that would do something dishonest. It's one thing for people to think that, but for them to think I'm stupid, I'm insulted. And it would have really been stupid for Nixon to do this, and he didn't do it. He had nothing to do with it. His inner circle had nothing to do with this thing. It was a joke, and it had to do with other things. And Mark Felt, my guy, knew from the beginning. He told his boss to please tell the White House that it's probably 2 young lieutenants who authorized this thing. By the way, he thought it was a CIA job too, but he thought it had to get some authorization from low-level dupes in the White House, and that's exactly what happened. There are 2 low-level guys, John Dean being a low-level guy and Jeb Magruder at the campaign being a low-level guy. So Mark Felt had this pegged from day one. He thought it was a CIA job that was authorized by some low-level guy in the White House, and that's exactly what it was. It's unfortunate, though, that the public can be duped so long on this thing. And look at today, there's still people that think that Putin and Trump conspired to overturn an election. And that's the power of the press. And they can do this. And it's nobody apologizes. Nobody says, oh, we were wrong. And nobody's certainly doing it in Watergate. So now here I am. I write a book, which your audience would love. I guarantee it. But is it going to get play with the major media? No, because I'm accusing them all of being dishonest. So usually media don't want to feature books that say that they're dishonest as a result of Watergate. But that's what started this whole thing. Modern journalism was given birth at Watergate. It was just too successful, too overwhelming, and too impactful. It's the most impactful scandal in our nation's history, and it was caused by journalism. So now journalists go from guys who write who, what, when, where, to be these amazingly cool powers that be that control our politics. And it's a wonderful pose for journalists to have their sport coats slung over their shoulders, their ties loosened like Woodward and Bernstein, out there getting all the facts on their notebook at 11 o'clock at night. It's a romantic view, a romantic self-portrait, but they're the ones that publish it, and they're the ones that control the airwaves. And as someone once said, don't get in a fight with anybody who buys ink by the barrel. And that's what we have here. So nobody's going to come out and say, by the way, read O'Connor's book. I think it's kind of funny for me. I mean, it's just I'm amused by it. But the public should know that this is Exhibit A as to how this dishonest press got going in the first place.
Well, I'm definitely going to come out and say read O'Connor's book because it's fascinating. It's well written. It's very hard to put down because you just have a way of telling stories. that's just fantastic. Now, for people in my generation, and you just alluded to this, Watergate reporters Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein were heroes. Even Senator Sam Ervin of North Carolina, old line segregationist Democrat. People in my generation, history started like a few minutes before the Watergate committee. We had no idea Sam Ervin's background. I didn't find out till just a few years ago that Republicans on the committee, like Howard Baker, wanted to look into some of LBJ's dirty tricks. And Chairman Ervin's like, no, just Watergate. That's it. So a lot of us wanted to grow up to do what people like Woodward and Bernstein did, maybe even get into politics like Sam Ervin. And you make a very strong case in your book that, and you just said it moments ago, that the way Woodward and Bernstein handled this story was revolutionary. It sent shockwaves into the media, and it forever changed the way that most reporters look at how they do what they do. And sadly, I don't think there's any way to put the genie back in the bottle. Do you?
No, I don't. The only thing we can do is highlight the fact that these guys are dishonest. And my book proves it, that if you're dishonest in Watergate, what else are you, this is a style of journalism that leads itself to dishonesty, because if you're trying to make a political point, are you going to tell everything? If a lawyer goes into court alone without an opponent and he gets to talk to the jury without a judge, is he going to tell all the bad facts about his case? No, he's going to go in and get a verdict. And this is what the press does now. They're all by themselves. They can't be sued for defamation, really. They can go in and talk to the jury of public opinion without opposition. So that's very much a power. Now, most people don't trust the press because of that. But here I have produced solid evidence that the whole basis for this project is fraudulent. The whole basis for it is fraudulent. And that's why I did this, because if Watergate was fraudulent, that's sort of the ticket for everyone else to, and to be fair, most of these reporters don't understand that concealment of facts is fraud. If Enron conceals something, they all go to jail. Okay. You can't conceal, that's a form of fraud, but the newspapers don't seem to understand that, and they don't get caught up in it because you have New York Times v. Sullivan and immunity and all that for everything you publish. So as long as they don't say something that's blatantly affirmatively false and with malice aforethought, then they can't get sued. So you can defraud till the cows come home, and that's the media we have today, Doc.
Well, I think that most laymen, most people who are not attorneys, they look at scandalous allegations against people, and they're like, well, if it's not true, why doesn't the guy sue? They don't know about New York Times versus Sullivan. They don't know the high bar that the Supreme Court put on public figures being able to sue for being slandered or libeled or whatever. And I think it's very important that you brought that out, because if you're a public figure and somebody defames you, you gotta prove that malice, right?
Absolutely, and it's very hard to do. Look at Sarah Palin. She had a pretty good case just recently, and the judge threw it out and more or less told the jury that. So it's a very hard burden here to meet, and it costs a lot of money, and most people aren't going to do it. So it's just unfortunate.
You're featured in Dinesh D'Souza's new film, Police State. In your view, how did the Watergate scandal lead to what many of us view as today's police state?
Well, first of all, the CIA didn't get caught up in it, did it? And it was able to topple a president. Rather than it getting called on for doing wrong, it survived. And remember, it survived with what? With the help of a biased press. Now, fast forward to 2016, where the press and the CIA and FBI all get together to collude on the Russiagate hoax, which was a hoax, and everybody knew it. Inside, they knew it. So that shows how the police state started. Remember, every police state, and we have a semi-police state. We don't have a real, we're going that direction. It's sort of a soft police state. But every police state has one-party rule. We have something like that. And you also have a one-party press. We have something like that. It's not completely one way or the other, but we have a press that's more or less one party. We have a bureaucracy that's one party. We have universities that are one party. And so that's what we've learned out of Watergate, and it helps the police state to have a press who believes it's its job to go one way. The people, when journalists were questioned as to why they went to journalism school after Watergate, they all said to change the world. If you're going to change the world, you have to be on a team. And that ends up being a basis for a police state.
Absolutely. John O'Connor, the new book is The Mysteries of Watergate, What Really Happened. It's available everywhere books are sold. I recommend Mr. O'Connor's website, postgatebook.com. God bless you, sir. We appreciate you coming on the program, and we wish you Godspeed.
Thanks, Doc. Great talking to you. You've got a great podcast going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our tweet of the day is brought to you by Red River Auto, the big old car dealership in the middle of the USA that believes in freedom, including your freedom to buy the car, truck, van, or SUV of your choice online at redriverauto.com and have it delivered to your front door anywhere in the continental USA.
Tweet of the day.
Today's tweet of the day is from the great Bo Snerdley, longtime producer of the late, great Rush Limbaugh. He links to his own website, thedailybs.com. I guess that stands for Bo Snerdley. And an article on the faith of our new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana. Now, in the article are some embedded tweets. The first one is from a liberal who is terrified that Johnson told Hannity in an interview over at Fox. Someone asked me today in the media, they said, it's curious. People are curious. What does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun? I said, well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. The next embedded tweet at thedailybs.com is from Pastor Stephen Cox, who embedded a picture of the Speaker and 6 other members of the House kneeling in prayer on the floor of the House. Pastor Cox said, new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, brought his Bible to the House floor yesterday, read scripture, and then prayed with other congressional leaders, a light in a dark place. May God use this man to make a difference in such perilous times. The next embedded tweet is from Greg Price, who has a clip from C-SPAN in his tweet with this quote from Speaker Johnson. He says, I believe that Scripture and the Bible is very clear, that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time. Now, Greg Price responds to this quote from Speaker Mike Johnson saying, you don't see too many politicians these days that talk about faith like this. Iowa Christian leader Bob Vanderplatz then responds, it's exciting to hear the new Speaker of the House discuss his faith openly. Now, again, all of these tweets were embedded in thedailybs.com, the website of the wonderful Bo Snerdley, whose real name is James Golden, and he was producer of the Rush Limbaugh Show for many, many years. He seems like a really nice guy. Hope I have a chance to meet him someday. Now, while I have no doubt that I will have policy disagreements from time to time with a new speaker, He's already spoken out about more funding for Ukraine. I am encouraged that he is a man of faith, and I look forward to great things from him. Again, today's tweet of the day has been brought to you by Mitch Ward and our friends at redriverauto.com.
Tweet of the day.
You've been watching episode 414 of the all-new Doc Washburn Show. The views and opinions expressed on the Doc Washburn Show do not necessarily reflect those of our advertisers, but they love us and we love them. If you have any questions for us, email us at contact@docwashburnshow.com. Today's program has been produced by Tim Terrible, directed by Mick Messy. This has been a Terribly Messy production. Portions of today's show will be taken overseas and dropped. If you'd like a transcript of today's episode of the all-new Doc Washburn Show, simply peel the roof off a Rolls-Royce panel truck and send it to Mansour's Computer Solutions, 7th floor of the Ephemeral B. Smoot Building, Whitehall, Arkansas, in care of Sheriff Mansour Sempier X, Senior Vice President, Engineering, IT, and Interoperability for the Doc Washburn Show. And that's the way it is, Friday, October 27th, 2023.